you can produce an amazing podcast, you post it, and nothing happens. In that little tiny niche, nobody is speaking about.
Laura Flamarich isn't just a journalist. She's a storyteller who turns complex technology into human stories. At JANZZ.technology, she dives deep into HR tech, ethical AI, and the future of work, making what's hard to understand impossible to ignore.
Sometimes we even produce podcasts having people in mind. If we think that person still did not really get it, then we can just send an email. And I think this most of the time really helps. Of course, in English or maybe in Spanish or the languages that are more spoken. But Japanese one was very successful. And then you are like, oh, okay, so in English, it almost had no reach. But then in Japanese, it reached a lot of people. So we started testing, like we also did one in Thai, one in Greek, one in Lithuanian. We also did one in Galician. Podcasts are the way to go as long as...
Welcome to the Consulting Leaders Podcast, where we talk about the business of consulting. Whether you're looking to grow your practice or learn from the stories of leaders in consulting, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Guillaume Jouvencel, ex-PwC and co-founder of GHA Marketing. Join me as I interview the best consultants in their niche. Let's get on with the show. Laura, can you tell me your podcast story, please?
Yeah, of course. So we started some years ago, like in 2022, when some companies started making podcasts, but it was not a thing like it is today. And then we thought, why not? Because we like to be present in almost all the channels that we feel that are useful for us. And we thought podcast is the perfect medium to make very complex topics more digestible, like to break them down and to explain it in a more conversational and friendly way. So that's how we ended up having the company podcast.
Why do you think is that? Why do you think podcast is the right medium to actually break down complex, advanced topics? You mentioned it in a conversational way, but like, why the podcast specifically?
At least to me, it's very easy because you just have to listen. I mean, nowadays, yes, we also record and you can watch the people talking like in a TV format, but the origin, it's more like about like the radio, no? It's about listening stories and about storytelling a little bit. And I find it way more easy to reading like than having to read a white paper or an article. It's more digestible. I don't know how to say it, but it's easier to get all the information from complex topics and understand them in a conversational way in this case, because our podcast is always like two people. You have always the host asking questions that probably the listener is wondering, oh, what is that? And then you have the expert clarifying it for you.
I think the whole point of learning, right, is ideally to have fun whilst doing it, to not feel like it's a task, a burden, or even potentially even learning. You want to have fun and for it to be smooth. Podcast, from what we see, is something that allows that, right? Because you're going to listen to two people interacting, asking questions, not going straight to the point always, potentially doing some walkarounds and follow-ups and like, oh, but what do you mean with that? And like further explaining the topic, as you say, in a conversational way. Conferences help that, right? Panel discussions, but then you lack the reach that a podcast can give you, which helps a lot. So if we tie this back to JANZZ.technology, hopefully I'm not butchering the name too much. Why is it that you have to explain complex topics, right? What's the business behind the podcast?
Yeah, so we are a technology company, basically in a very niche world, which is like the HR technology world. And into that world, we are specialized in semantic matching and or job matching and semantic skills. In order to understand that it's more complex than just a word, because it's how to explain meaning, how to understand, how to make connections that for us humans, we learn as kids and it's something that we can do. But when we are talking about computers, about machines, about systems for hiring, for instance, then we have problems because machines nowadays don't have the knowledge that we do. And so our job is to make these machines as smart as they can be, thanks to all this knowledge that we have. So one of our core products is the JANZZ On, which is the ontology. And the ontology is like the big encyclopedia that we have built all of these years for basically connecting all the meaning of everything in this little world, which is actually quite big, of work. And there you have skills, education, you have international classification systems, and everything is connected with nodes. And yeah, it's a bit, it can get really
There's a lot.
technical when
Yeah.
you want. So whenever we are approaching some clients, sometimes it is good that we say, look, you can have a look at this podcast about this specific topic. And then they can understand a little bit more in depth how marvelous the products that we have are.
It's a thought leadership endeavor, right? It's something you're gonna do to break down concepts, to show the industry that you have the knowledge, you have the expertise, and you're willing to share it for free through the podcast, which allows you to then get people to say, "Hey, wait a second, who the hell is JANZZ.technology? And like, should I look into them further?" So the podcast has been going on for a while. I think you mentioned 2022. So that's at the moment we're recording this episode, 3 years and something. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced hosting the podcast and, producing it, marketing it, publishing it to make sure that it has this business impact that you want it to have? What were
Yeah.
some of those challenges?
Maybe in the very beginning it was more technicalities, so I had to learn a little bit more like about audio editing and so on. But I think most of the challenges are always to really try to break down as much as we can the dense topics so that it really doesn't sound still too technical. This is always, I think, a bit the challenge. In terms of marketing, I mean, we don't really do marketing. We have a very, very small target group. And for us, it is way more important, like the quality of what we produce. So it's more, less is more for always. So we rather focus on knowledge, and we are happy with what we've done. And if it took longer, it took longer. And then once it's done, we publish it. And then we share it to the people we already have probably in mind. So sometimes we even produce podcasts having some people in mind. And then we publish it on LinkedIn and Spotify and all platforms from podcasts, and then as well on YouTube. But more than the LinkedIn post, we actually don't go much further. But we do send it per email, or we do mention it on meetings or additional element that we bring. So once we give a presentation or whatsoever, if we think that person still did not really get it, then we can just send, an email. Oh, by the way, like we have this podcast on this specific topic. So if you want to listen to it, you can. And I think this most of the time really helps.
So you're not using it only as a top of funnel channel. It is also something that you're going to leverage when you're in a business conversation, potential, new client relationship. They are not quite there yet, so they need a bit of help to get through the finish line. And instead of calling and asking like, are you signing whatsoever, you're sending free resources. Hey, this might help clarify a few questions that you had. Hey, by the way, we did this with that person, bit of social proof at the same time. And helping people get to the finish line thanks to this. Is that what you're explaining?
Correct. Yes. So sometimes you can give in a meeting, you can be 1 hour speaking or 2 hours, and then you can send a presentation. But in the end, I mean, what does the presentation tell you, right? If you have then like other supporting material that they can rewatch later on because the topics are complicated, then this really is helpful.
Makes a lot of sense. So those are part of the challenges, right? And how you fix them. What are the recommendations that you would give to B2B podcasters? And here I'm going to go even a step further, which is in the technology space, right? Which is again another layer of like complexity, obviously, as you just mentioned, just by the nature of the industry. So what are some of the recommendations you can give to B2B podcasters in technology to have a growing, successful podcast that serves a business purpose?
Definitely the quality of the content that you're producing. You have to believe and you have to be sure of what you're doing. And then when you produce such a thing that it's not out there in the market, because you would be surprised, like not everyone goes into depth into many specific topics, then you just have to be patient, I would say, right? Because of course, the first step, you can produce an amazing podcast, but then you post it, you're out there and nothing happens. Then I would say the second thing, apart from being original and having this very interesting topic, then would be to be persistent and to continue building up, and of course connecting with more and more people. Of course, bringing different guests and different voices and different experts helps, because you also bring the friends or the connections of these people that you bring on the podcast, and then spreading the word slowly, and that would be.
What I like in what you just mentioned is that it's a long-term game, right? What specifically kept you going? Because you've been doing this for 3 years, right? You have about 30, 40 episodes live. So you've consistently been publishing an episode a month for the last 3 years. What kept you going? Because a lot of people, especially in B2B marketing, right? When this is not bringing at least a direct form of ROI fast enough, they tend to just give up on it, right? So in your case, in the case of JANZZ.technology, what kept you going, and how did you make sure that the quality of the content that you just mentioned stayed at the best level throughout those 3 years?
Well, what keep us going is because we are sure that we need to explain those topics, which is actually linked to how do we choose these topics. So
Fair enough.
basically, we just continue because we don't care about the reach. We continue because we are very niche. Like, we are is inside technology, inside HR, and then there's us in this little branch, which is like the semantic skills and the job matching. And in that little tiny niche, nobody is speaking about the topics that we are tackling. So that keeps us going. And of course, we also like and enjoy, and a lot of like my work colleagues like to participate. And so it's also kind of we ended up making it also a company thing. But most importantly is that we know how to produce the content for our niche, and then we just keep on doing it, because if we reach these 10, 20 people, we are happy. We don't need 1,000 views on that podcast. We just need that person to understand it. And then if that person understands it, we're happy, because then we've done our job.
No, but this is fantastic. This is, in my opinion, this is the best way to look at podcasts, right? Because what a lot of people will do when they start a podcast or they are thinking of starting a podcast is that they want to go as broad as possible. They want to tap into the widest, broadest audience out there. The problem with that is if your content is for everybody, by definition, it is for nobody specifically. And especially in B2B, you need to build trust. You need to build that authority before people come to you and like willing to pay you the 5-6 figures of your project engagement, potentially even 7 or 8 in some cases. They need to know that you're the right person. And for that, you need to almost be speaking to them only in your content, namely the podcast.
Correct. And as I said, and then related to the topic that you choose, and you mentioned building trust, of course, with patience and continuously like proving yourself that we are like having a voice in that niche. Of course, then we came up with, well, we see every day when we meet our potential customers, like what they really are not understanding or what they understood wrong. And then we're like, okay, so let's make a podcast on that. So if it helps for the next time.
So I like that, because that was going to be my next question. How do you decide on the topics that you're going to talk about on the show? It is directly almost user generated. Is that what you're saying? It's based on the feedback from clients or potential clients that you're receiving?
Most of the time, yes. We also have sometimes I don't know, sometimes it's some hot topic out there that we also want to give our opinion on that. But most of the time is when we find out, okay, this is not clear, or this is confusing because everyone is saying A or B, and then, okay, this is what we think. So we kind of always position ourselves again and again, and we've been believing always the same since the company started. So there is this hype in AI, right? And this also creates a lot of confusion. So topics as easy as like, oh, AI replace me, will I lose my job? This topic is still today on the table, and people are still afraid of that. So you have to explain, look, in order for that to happen, this and this and this and this and this and this needs to happen. So first we need to understand machines are not smart, right? We make them smart. There is no artificial brain thinking itself. And if there is one, like, because you can understand that things like ChatGPT seem to understand, it's like, yes, you can let this machine rule the world if you want, but then you will see the consequences of it. It's full of bias, it's full of mistakes. Like, he's just always giving you an answer because this is how it has been programmed. But most of the time, he doesn't have any clue of what he's giving to you. Actually, he cannot think. He's just programmed to give you a sequence of words. So because of things like that, we we like to keep creating and keep being there.
So how do you actually, so that's how you decide on the content, right? How do you research the content? And whilst you want to keep it conversational, of course, how do you then craft the right structure for the episodes to be as good as possible? Because I suppose it takes an expert to talk about a very specific topic, right? So how do you approach this, Laura, and at JANZZ Technology?
What I do, of course, first I inform myself about the topic. Most of the time, we have some material already that we've done ourselves, like our own experts have. For instance, let's say, write a white paper. So then I can contact them, I can speak with them, I can inform myself. We can ask with other work colleagues what do they think and what's not clear, what's interesting. And then, of course, you have to have in mind which person are you going to bring to talk about that topic. So, of course, you need the expert in the field. And then kind of prepare it together, the conversation. It's not, doesn't need to be fully scripted, but I do write a script, which then we don't need to follow. But it gives a structure, and then it's like, okay, we want to speak about this and then that, and then these are the conclusions and some call to action. And
That's the right way to go. That's to tie back to your very first point, right? This is how you keep it conversational. This is how you make sure you have the right background and context for the episode. Then you're gonna let the experts talk, and like it's not about leading the conversation, it's about being led and just guiding of like, hey, we might want to go in that direction, but if the conversation takes us elsewhere, then so be it. And this is how we're gonna provide value to the audience as well. Another question that I had for you, Laura, is when we look at, so you've been publishing episodes for the last 3 years, right? And when we think about podcasts, a lot of people often ask the question of like, okay, how often should I publish a podcast episode, right? So is it every week? Is it every other week? Is it every month? Is it once per quarter? Whatever it is. When we look at the frequency of publication of your episodes, right? We're sometimes gonna have 3 episodes in 3 weeks. Sometimes we're gonna have about a month break. How do you strategize around this? Is it deliberate? Like, how do you think about the publishing schedule of your content and your podcast?
correct. I mean, deliberate, ideally, we would be more consequent and more consistent. So this is on me, but I'm not only the podcast, like the host of the podcast and the producer. I do have other things to do. Although I would like, of course, to focus more time on the podcasting. So we try to do always seasons because we keep at least the 7 chapters. So every season has 7 chapters. And this is our way of, let's say, if we take a bit of time in publishing the next season, it's okay. So once we start a season, we really try to at least every month publish one or two, because when we have them, then we have no problem in publishing. We also don't see the point in making people wait because we don't have a broad audience. Like we have our target group. So if in 1 week we post 2 episodes, it's fine because the topics are relevant enough and we don't care that much about the timing. I know maybe other podcasts make more sense that they are constantly delivering, but in our case, it's more about the content and not so much about how frequently we are creating it. So we at least try to finish the seasons.
So again, I like that a lot because, as I always say in podcasts, it's not a one size fits all, right? It needs to make sense to you, it needs to make sense to the audience, and it needs to make sense to whoever you are bringing value to. So in your case, what you're saying is, if I understood properly, Laura, what you want is to put the right content out there for the right people, and it will be there once we have it, as soon as possible. There's not going to be a pressure on like, hey, we need to publish an episode every week so that we fit the best practices, whilst maybe having a lower quality content, because that could be what it leads to. I like the way you're thinking about this. What's your biggest success from podcast over the last 3 years? What are you the most proud of? And what has been, maybe if we can tie this back to the business, right? What is one of the things that you're like, oh yeah, this is why we do the podcast? What's your biggest win?
Of course, whenever we receive positive feedback from people that said, "Oh, I've listened to this episode. It's great." So of course we are proud of that, and I do get some of these messages, which is nice. And then another thing is sometimes you are surprised about, you can never really estimate like how many people will you reach or not. So sometimes with topics that I thought, okay, this is more like normal, it's not so interesting, then they reached a lot of people. And then some other topics that I thought, oh, this is amazing, then nobody had interest on it. So it happens. And I want to add something else here. Another thing we do, which is not consistent at all, but we do it for specific moments on time. And because we work worldwide with very different countries, what we did sometimes is take one of the episodes I've done in English and we translated it to the language specific that we needed. And for instance, I think it was the Japanese one, was very successful. And then you are like, oh, okay, so in English, like it almost had no reach. But then in Japanese, it reached a lot of people. So, and then it makes you think, okay, so imagine the podcast world in Japan or whatever about this topic. Like maybe there is even way less content than in ours, right? Because I mean, most of the content is of course, in English or maybe in Spanish or the languages that are more spoken. But then, and Japanese is a very spoken language. I mean, don't get me wrong. But the fun fact was that that one was very successful. And so we started testing some other, like we also did one in Thai, one in Greek, one in Lithuanian. We also did one in Galician because we wanted to demonstrate that we were able, because we are kind of linguistic experts, not me, but our team. So in order to prove that, we also did this podcast in Galician because we have two work colleagues that speak Galician. So we did that. And it's another way of like showing how much capable you are, how like to prove all your marketing, right? It's like, it's not smoke on the air, like, look, here we are, and we are even explaining it to you in that language. So that's also something that makes me happy. And in that case, it's also challenging because I am editing it and sometimes I don't understand the language. Like I don't speak Thai or I don't speak Japanese. But we still do it. We still make it possible. I find it great.
I love this. Why do you think is that? Why do you think a podcast is more successful in Japanese than it is in English?
Well, definitely the language has a lot to do. I mean, when you're reading a white paper and you're not very fluent in English and it's in English, in the beginning it's really hard because it's a lot of technical words. But then if they offer it to you in your mother tongue, so let's say in French, then of course for you it's way more easy. You read it faster, you understand it faster. So the same for a podcast. Yes, I mean, we all stick to English, but sometimes, if especially we work with government, sometimes, then you want to communicate in their mother tongues.
I agree with that. I think so what's interesting to see as well is in English, this is where most people tend to go, right? Even the foreigners, like you and I are doing right now. What's interesting though is that so you're in a very specific niche already in English. When you go into that niche in a specific language, then all of a sudden you get access to a whole pool of people who might not want to listen to a podcast in English, although they are speaking it exactly for the reasons you highlighted, but also because it's so technical. A podcast is something that you're gonna, hit and play and then do something else at the same time. So you don't want to really have to focus on actually translating live in your head. So that's very interesting. And there is much less offer as well. I think it's as simple as that. Like supply and demand, it has always been about those two. And in English, you have much more supply for information than you do in any other language, which is potentially one of the reasons why the Japanese episode went super well. That's an interesting strategy. Now I'm thinking of doing more French episodes. Laura, there is a question that I like to ask all my guests to wrap up those interviews, which is, when Jeff Bezos was building Amazon, right, he wasn't trying to figure out what's going to change in 10 years or what's going to be the next innovation, disruption in 10 years. Rather, he was asking himself, what is still going to be true in 10 years that is true today? People are still going to want fast shipping. They're still going to want lots of options, ideally cheap, and they're still going to want great customer service. Tying this back to podcast, what is it, since you've been doing this for 3 years, what is it that you think is true today and that will stay true in 10 years that people should double down on?
Podcasts will definitely, in maybe in other platforms, in other ways, but the audio file, this concept of the podcast, like the same way radio has been here for 100 years and it has never not died and it is still today very useful. I think podcasts are the way to go as long as you still bring insightful stories and you explain them and you make them human and you have a person, like because now, of
Yeah.
course, I'm very sure that AI podcasters will also start creating content. So you want real people, you want real stories, and you will always need to break down complex topics for clarity. So this will definitely still be this way.
Thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus. If people want to find out more about you, about your podcast, or JANZZ Technology, where should they go?
The podcast is called JANZZ.technology, the podcast. Otherwise, our website is JANZZ.technology. And in the website, we also have the podcast link. Same for Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, JANZZ.technology, and you will find us.
We'll put all the links in the description. Laura, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Leaders Podcast. We hope you learned valuable lessons on how to grow your practice and take your business to the next level. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this show so you never miss an episode. To apply and be a guest on the show, click the link in the description. See you next time.